and welcome to the Arabic Hour. My name is Ghanwa Hakim. On today's program, we will bring you part 2 of our interview with Bo Bosaleh and present our main interview guest, Maysoon Pachachi, London-based Iraqi filmmaker.
It's like the world is being unmade all around you, and you make something. It's a kind of internal resistance. It's a psychic resistance, and then I mean in Iraq, which is a country that has been invaded and looted and trashed and so forth. There's so much people have had to deal with the ruin of their environment, of everything. So many times in our history, there's always been this very strong creative streak, this very strong commitment to making things. I mean, even during sanctions, when people couldn't get canvas to paint on, they couldn't get oil paint, and somehow they produced pictures.
The whole texture of the street is there, the whole pain of the time, going all the way back to the sanctions, and finally to and the Gulf War and the invasion. I mean, she compresses that all in there in her own emotional feelings and attachment and memory of being with her father. It's an extremely strong piece.
Today, we commemorate the 10-year anniversary of the U.S. invasion of Iraq by highlighting the rich culture Iraq once treasured and its path to revival with London-based Iraqi filmmaker Maysoon Pachachi. Before we go to the interview, I want to say a few words about what Iraq and Iraqi society has contributed to Arab culture and world civilization overall. Most people in the West are familiar with ancient history. They know Mesopotamia as the cradle of human civilization. Yet little is known about Iraq's history during the European Dark Ages. While Europe was in the dark, Iraq's major cities of Basra, Najaf, Kufa, Baghdad, and Mosul were centers for theology, arts, sciences, poetry, and literature. Baghdad did not just maintain knowledge of the Greeks, but contributed major advances to modern medicine, mathematics, horticulture, geography, and astronomy, among others. People in the Arab and Muslim world feel a sense of debt to this great nation's contributions. Destruction of this vibrant society during the Mongol invasion was vast, but Iraq strongly recovered its civil society after its independence from Britain. The Iraq built after independence had a modern constitution protecting the rights of women, as one example, civil institutions providing university educations, public schools, medical care, and modern industries. What I'm trying to do here is give you a few examples to highlight the impact of wars on Iraqi society. Sanctions, invasion, and occupation decimated the fabric of society, and intellectuals fled the country. Despite this overhaul of Iraq's society and the devastation resulting from the invasion and the occupation, a collective memory of what Iraq once was and what Iraqis hope Iraq to be is stored and shared through Iraqi culture and arts. Today's feature guest, Maysoon Pachachi, is a London-based filmmaker of Iraqi origin. She was educated in Iraq, the USA, and the UK. She worked for many years as a documentary and drama film editor in the UK and has worked since 1994 as an independent documentary film director. Ms. Pachachi has taught film in Britain and Palestine and is a founding member of ACT Together, Women's Action for Iraq. In 2004, she co-founded Independent Film and Television College, a tuition-free film training school in Baghdad. Today, we are discussing her film, Open Shutters, Iraq. This film documents a photography project during which a group of women from 5 cities in Iraq live and work together in Damascus, Syria, while learning photography. Their experience, however, is not just creative, it is transformative. Open Shutters Iraq documents the full spectrum of emotion one faces while reflecting on Iraq, the grief and struggle, yet also the resilience and strength of the Iraqi people. And now, to my interview with Maysoon Pachachi. Maysoon, thank you for joining us at the Arabic Tower today. It's great to have you here. Before we get to talking about your film and the film that you've been showing in the Boston area and throughout the country and abroad, I'd like to speak a little bit about your personal history and connection with Iraq, to see how that influenced your creation of the film.
Well, my family is Iraqi. We come from Baghdad. On my mother's side, she comes from Mosul. My dad's side comes from Baghdad. And I have lived a lot of my life outside of Iraq. I mostly in the UK, in London. And after being outside the country for 35 years, I went back in 2004. And I made a film while I was there, really about trying to connect with things that I remembered from my childhood, and also to see what was going on then and to hear what had happened in the 35 years that I hadn't been there. So it was a way of reconnecting with the country. At the same time, I set up a film training center in Baghdad, free of charge.
How was your collective memory growing up outside of Iraq and the stories that you had heard from your parents and things? How was that reflected in reality when you went back for the first time?
Well, when I went back after 35 years, you can imagine the whole it was, I didn't know where I was, because obviously the city had changed beyond recognition, Baghdad, at that time. It was 30 years later, plus there had been wars going on for 25 years, a dictatorship that had been invaded by the American forces and so forth. So the city was very different. And it was only actually when I went to the old part of the city by the river, where Al-Mutanabbi Street is, that area, that I knew where I was, because these were places that I'd been as a child, and I remembered them, and they hadn't changed that much. So they were Mutanabbi Street, some of the old cafes, the souk, the market, Souk Sarai, which was a sort of general market, had a lot of antiques and things like that in, and we always used to go there and look for old jewelry, like this ring that I'm wearing, for example. And then you walk down to the river, and there was the Mustansariya University, which was a medieval university, which was an extraordinary building and had a very real big impact on my life when I was 10 years old and I went there, So, but, the country had changed. It wasn't just the physical appearance of the city of Baghdad, which I knew. It was people. People had been through a lot. They'd been through 8 years of war with Iran. They'd been through 13 years of the most comprehensive sanctions in history, which ripped apart the fabric of that society in many ways. And then there was the 2003 invasion, and it was under occupation, and there were American tanks in the streets. So people were having to live with all this, and shocks and the beginnings of sectarian violence of a kind that they hadn't seen before. This harshness that people had to live with had an effect on the way people felt about life, the manners. Even the language had changed. I tended to speak a quite old-fashioned kind of Arabic, and people would go, "You sound like somebody who's like 84 years old saying that word. Nobody uses that word anymore," that sort of thing. So, on the one hand, there was that feeling of strangeness, and realizing that I was acting in a way that other people were not acting. But there was also a familiarity which came in it. It was in small, sensual details, like a certain kind of light, a very particular kind of light in the afternoon, filtered through dust, and on the palm fronds, for example, the shadows cast by the palm leaves, or a certain kind of bird that only sings in the afternoon, a certain kind of dove. And the minute I heard those, then I thought, I'm here. I know where I am.
The women that are in your film, they did speak a lot about their own memories before the conflict, before the 2003 invasion of Iraq, and before the occupation. were their stories similar to yours? Did you find a connection, with the women that you spent this time with?
Well, the women who were speaking in the film, they were talking about growing up just before the Iranian war began, and then the Iranian war beginning, and so forth. This was a time when I wasn't in Iraq at all. So in a way, their experiences were not my experiences. But like everybody else there, what was happening was that people, it was a photographic project, and we all lived together in a house in Syria for a month, learning about photography. The women were learning about photography. There were 12 women from 5 different cities in Iraq, from Baghdad and Basra and Kirkuk and Fallujah and someplace else. Anyway, they came, and we all lived in this house together, and the idea was that they were learning about photography. At the same time, they drew maps of their lives, big kind of like charts charting the lifeline, the ups and downs of their lives, and the major turning points. And they wrote their comments, and they wrote bits of poetry, and they put photographs, family photographs and personal photographs on these huge charts, and each woman got up and presented her life to the others. And these were people who didn't know each other, who came from very different backgrounds. They were different ages, different educational backgrounds and social backgrounds and all the rest of it, different religions, different ethnicities. But none of that seemed to matter in this house at all, and they were very open with each other. So what happened was, as the people were telling their life stories, the feeling that you got is that the other people listening to whoever was telling their story at that particular time was actually not listening with their ears, they were listening with their own story. They were thinking, oh yes, I remember that time. This is what was happening to me then. They were sort of constructing their story. And to a certain extent, it happened to me as well, although I probably didn't relate in quite the same way as everybody else did, because I hadn't actually gone through that experience, except that I'd lived it at a distance. I'd lived the Iran-Iraq war at a distance from outside the country. I'd lived the 1991 Gulf War, which was a very traumatic experience for me outside the country. So I was doing the same thing as the other women were doing. I was constructing my story, but it was slightly different.
So actually, I had the opportunity to see the film, and it's obviously very moving. And I actually watched it with an Iraqi friend of mine, and he did say something during the film which I think really rings true for a lot of the viewers and a lot of Iraqi women and men even. He said, the story of these women, the stories that they're telling, this is the story of my mother, and this is the story of my sisters. And the film is one that is a shared experience. It's something that brings out elements of everyone's life. Was that an aim, a hope in your film, to connect these women to the greater country as a whole, and to have people explore their own experiences through the experience of these women?
Well, I didn't have an aim in making this film. This project was happening. The photographic project was not my doing, it was somebody else's doing. And she invited me to come make a film about it. I didn't know what was going to happen. I had no idea, really, how it was going to work, this thing. And the life maps, I didn't really understand what she was talking about, but I just went, because I thought, well, it sounds like it could be interesting. And as the thing evolved, as people were telling their life maps and they were doing the photography and stuff like that, I realized that it was like a piece of cloth that was being woven, where every strand was a different color. But altogether it makes a kind of fabric of experience, of collective experience. So what was happening there, it was both individual and collective at the same time. Each woman had her individual story, and at the same time she was part of a larger kind of social fabric that they were all weaving together. That's what it felt like. And that, in a way, is, oddly enough, it's the way that I've always seen things. I've always thought this business is very individualistic. This is my story, and I'm right here in the center of the world. Never made sense to me. And I think there's a way when you're living in an area, in a place of turmoil, where the outside circumstances are quite powerful. They impact on your life, even if you're living halfway across the world. They impact on your life. you have a sense of yourself being an individual, and you have a sense of the rest of the world all the time. You know, you have a sense of this kind of dialectic between your individual experience and the experience of others. That's how I grew up, anyway. That's my sense of it. So this project was really an example of that, and so it felt very important to present this experience to people outside.
And how has the project been received by people outside of Iraq, Iraqis and non-Iraqis alike?
Well, I mean, in terms of Iraqis, I found that when I was showing it in London, that a lot of Iraqis came to see it once, twice, 3 times. They kept coming back. And one, a guy who's a painter, who's a wonderful painter and a very nice guy, he just kept coming back. And I said, "Why are you coming? You know, what's happening here?" And he said, "Well, I've never known these stories. I've never known. I'm Iraqi. All my life and all of this. But I'm a man, and the quality of female experience is something that I haven't really heard like this. I haven't really been let into it like this." So I think people were very. So I've had various reactions, and then other people would, you show it to Iraqis, and it's very. It's upsetting because it starts. You see how the country is falling apart. So I've had screenings where, in Germany quite recently, for example, where there was an Iraqi guy in the audience and he just fell apart. He started to cry and stuff like that. And that happens from time to time. I've had a lot of remarkable audience reaction from people who've written me. People I don't necessarily know who found my email or gone on my website or whatever and written me, who've seen the film and just have written extraordinary responses. So it seems to have got through to people. It's not a film that everybody wants to distribute. It's not a film that necessarily gets into festivals, but it seems to have touched off something in people. A way of, for people who are not Iraqi or not from the Arab world even, sometimes they're led so much into the women's lives. And they are literally telling their own stories. They're actually standing in front of the camera telling their own stories. That they've felt connected to these people. They can latch on to a bit of the experience. That although the circumstances in which people have lived have been completely different, there's been wars and dictatorship and stuff like that, they can still relate to something that somebody's saying. And this is like a barrier coming down for people, I think, because they're used to seeing these people, the Iraqis, on the screen as kind of abstract victims. If they see them at all, they see them in the aftermath of an explosion where there's, smoke and blood and fire on the streets and people beating their chests and crying and stuff like that. And it's completely abstract. They don't know who these people are, what this neighborhood in which the bomb has fallen is, or anything like that. They have no idea. So I think on that level, this film has got through to people because it's quite intimate.
It is. It's intimate and it's raw in a way that is extremely emotional in kind of 2 ways. One is the film itself, which is showing the experience of the women, and then it's the women's stories themselves that they are, as you said, leading you through their lives and bringing down this veil even that's been covering the world's eyes about the situation in Iraq. Have you faced any resistance towards the film about the actual facts that are being told that they're undisputable? They're actual footage and photographs of the destruction and of the war. Have people said this is being led down a certain path, it's biased? Have you faced reactions like that?
Actually very little, but there was at one point the photographic work that the women produced. They were there to sort of learn about photography and make photo stories about their lives. And they did remarkable work. People who had no experience with photography at all. They really did remarkable work. At one point, there was it was exhibited in an outdoor exhibition in sort of clear panels stuff, and it was a very sort of advanced technology where when the sun went down, the lights came up inside these things. Anyway, it was sort of pretty extraordinary by the river in London. And I remember being down there at one point, and there was, for example, there was a guy who had been in the U.S. Army, and he was livid. He was really livid. He said, "This is lies. This is all lies." And there was something by one of the people who participated was a 6-year-old girl, and he was just incensed by what she'd written as her biography, because she was wondering why the Americans were on the streets and didn't they have their own country and why had they come to their, all this sort of business. That's not the only thing she was talking about. She was talking about her friends and playing in the street and stuff like that. She was a 6-year-old child, But he just sort of said, this is, propaganda, and they've made it up, and it's all lies, and it was really extraordinary. But he was kind of hysterical with it. So I was really taken aback, because this is actually the lived experience of people. This is actually what they went through. They weren't holding forth about the Americans or anything like that. They were just sort of saying, this is what happened in my life.
Why do you think that he reacted in this way, especially, to the work of a 6-year-old child who doesn't have that sense of even what propaganda is? She just is able to say things as she sees them. Why do you think somebody would have such a reaction?
Well, I mean, he thought she was being kind of spoon-fed some sort of propaganda stuff. Her mind had been turned, kind of thing. I think he was defensive. I think it was a very. I don't know what his particular story was, but I think that for a lot of the American soldiers who ended up in Iraq, you see them. The veterans who are throwing away their medals and all the rest of it. That they were shocked by what they found and what they were asked to do, and what was happening to the Iraqi people. They saw it, and I think it was a very traumatizing experience for a lot of people. And so, you either got defensive about it or you admitted it, I think. And some people thought it was fine. But I think there's been a lot of people a lot of American people, American soldiers who've been very adversely affected by it, very badly. Affected, it really has affected them. So I don't know what this guy's story was, but it was a slightly hysterical reaction.
You are watching an interview with filmmaker Maysoon Pachachi on her documentary film Open Shutters, Iraq. We'll be back after this short break.
You are watching The Arabic Hour, a program of news, views, culture, cuisine, and the Arab American experience. To view today's program or any previous programs, log on to our website at www.arabichour.org.
In the film, as you said, the women started off in Damascus, learning about photography, and then they went back to Baghdad and to the other cities where they came from to shoot their life and their experiences. Did you connect with the women beyond this project? Do you know, for example, that 6-year-old girl who showed her photographs so beautifully? Have you remained in touch with them?
Oh, absolutely. I'm very in touch with her. I'm sort of on Skype with her every so often. She's now a kind of moody 12-year-old, kind of. No, I won't do this. I don't want to do that. All this kind of. I'm not wearing this dress. All that sort of business. And yes, she's still in Baghdad. Yes, she's very close. I'm very close to her, and her mother, who is there as well, and who's the Iraqi project manager on this project. I was very close to one of the women who got ill, who got cancer, and probably as a result of the kind of uranium pollution from the depleted uranium-tipped weapons that were fired in the south of the country, especially blanket bombings. And she couldn't get treatment inside Iraq, and so we tried to, I found a way of her getting treated in Lebanon. And I was very close to her. I was on the phone with her all the time. I was sort of dealing with this and trying to sort of set that up. So yeah, I am in contact with people. I'm in contact with people. Some of the people have stayed in Iraq. Some of the people have left since the film.
And how has the project itself and the film given them a different perspective on their daily life, or helped them to explain to other people about their own experiences? Do you think they learned something from the project?
I think yes. I think, and it was different for each person. What they got from it. But one woman who had been this was the project was in 2006-07. It was a time of extreme sectarian violence. I mean, extreme and barbaric sectarian violence was going on. It was a very scary time. So there was one woman there, for example, who was really kind of afraid to go out of the house. So all her photographs were from behind a window. And she says, as she says in the film, I didn't realize the way that I was living. I didn't realize the way that I was living. I didn't realize how frightened I was to go out on the street until I looked at the photographs, until I saw what I was doing. And she felt empowered by the business of actually taking these photographs and putting the story together, because they had to write captions and their life stories and stuff like that. And she said, and I've decided, okay, I go out on the streets. Maybe I'll die, maybe I won't die, but I will have done something. There's that sort of feeling. So, and there was another woman who said to me, this has changed my life, this project, because she said, she was a textile designer, so she said, I'm used to thinking about color and composition and, pattern and stuff like that. So from the aesthetic point of view, doing photographs wasn't the big thing. And she said, and I have taken a few photographs. She said, the most extraordinary thing is the business of having to listen to people. She said, we don't usually listen to each other's stories. We don't usually listen to people. And we really had to sort of sit there and not say anything and just listen to somebody talking about their whole life. And she said that was an extraordinarily transformative thing for her. It was a whole new way of thinking and being with people that she hadn't had a chance to be before, for example. So it changed people's lives in lots of ways. And I think, there was one woman who says in the thing, when I say to her, when I was talking to her, she was, she was in Baghdad. It was a very dangerous place to be, but she was kind of she was very courageous. She was out on the streets shooting, which people, taking photographs, something that people weren't doing then, and she was continually stopped by the National Guard and various militias and all of this business. And I said to her, what about the danger? And she said to me, well, the thing is, for me, there's a saying in Arabic that to not say anything about something that's going wrong is to be a mute devil. Basically, it's a wrong thing to do. It's immoral not to actually raise your voice and talk about something that's happening that's wrong. And she said, and these people, who are threatening me and so forth, okay, they kill me, but it's God that gave me my life, and it's God that'll take it away. So I'm not worried about what they're going to do to me, and whatever, She said the important thing is that I want to have done something in my life, and I want to get something about reality out to the world.
What was the most difficult part of making the film for you personally?
I think just carrying the stories, carrying everything that happened. It's you had to be you as a filmmaker, as the kind of filmmaker I am. I'm standing to one side and I'm kind of filming and absorbing and looking at people and trying to sort of intuit what's going on underneath the surface, what people are feeling underneath the surface, and absorbing the stories, some of which are kind of harrowing. And you're just sitting, and your place is to be a container for these things, and then you go and you edit it, for a long time, and you have to kind of try to honor the material and to put it together in a way that doesn't compromise it, doesn't, and it's very difficult because people are telling long stories, and in the end you use maybe 5 minutes of what they're saying. And you put it in a context that they have no control over and stuff like that. So all of that is very difficult. And I just think there was a tremendous, there was a lot of funny stuff that happened. There's a tremendous amount of pain. And it goes in, you feel it. And so, difficult thing for me, I finished the film, it was out, etc., etc., etc. And it was only 2 years after I finished the film that actually I suddenly there was a sort of gap in my life, and I was on my own for a little bit, and it was the dead of winter, which is not a good time for me in London because it's dark and cold and damp, But so I was there, and I just went, I just fell apart, it was like a delayed breakdown with this film, to a certain extent. I mean, that's a bit dramatic, but it was sort of, you know, and then you came to it. But the thing about it is that it's also, you derive hope from it as well, because actually, you know, you think about the circumstances and it's just mind-boggling and horrible. And then you hear people making jokes, you see them dance, you feel the kind of surge of power that they get because they're able to make something. It's like the world is being unmade all around you, and you make something. It's a kind of It's a kind of internal resistance. It's a psychic resistance. And then, I mean, in Iraq, which is a country that has been invaded and looted and trashed and so forth, so much people have had to deal with the ruin of their environment, of everything, so many times in their history. There's always been this very strong creative streak, this very strong commitment to making things. I mean, even during the sanctions, when people couldn't get canvas to paint on, they couldn't get oil paints, somehow they produced pictures. You know, when you couldn't, when the dictatorship was very tight around you, people would write things and then they would photocopy them and then they would distribute them clandestinely. It's always something that's kept people alive in this country, in that country. And it's the thing that gives, you can't be terribly optimistic. I mean, if you think about it, it's optimism is very hard, but hope is something you have to hold on to.
So what is your hope for the women that you grew to know and care about in the film, and for the country, and for your projects and yourself?
Well, I mean, I think if I have faith in anything, it's the sort of the creativity and sense of psychic resistance of the Iraqi people. I have faith in that, but I think in the end something will evolve out of that. It won't be in my lifetime, I don't think. You know, I don't think that I'll see any really very significant change in my lifetime, because it's been a complete destruction of the place. My hope is that people keep faith with that creativity and keep doing it. I mean, we're in a state where you can't really do very much. You know, you can drop pebbles in the pond and hope the ripples spread. That's all that I can do at the moment. And so the various things I make, the films, or the film school, or the whatever that I'm doing, that's what that is. But I think I have faith also in women in this part of the world. I think a lot of our disasters there are tied up with all kinds of geopolitics and so forth, and globalization and the rest of it. But I think it's also to do with very entrenched patriarchal structures in our societies, top-down patriarchal structures, and I think it's the women who can shake the basis of that. And I'm continually kind of impressed, really, by young women who are coming up and things they're doing and stuff like that. So I have a lot of hope for them.
Have you gone back to Iraq recently?
The last time I was there was in April, in Basra. I wasn't in Baghdad, I was in Basra, because the film training center that we have in Baghdad, we give courses, and this was the first time when we gave a course outside of Baghdad, in Basra. So I was there to teach.
And have you found, after the film was made, that more people are interested in filmmaking and photography and going to the center and learning more about the art?
Well, I mean, there are two different things. The photography is one project. It's a completely different, and the film training center is something else. The film training center is something that I set up with a colleague of mine called Qasim Abid, who's also a London-based Iraqi filmmaker. And this is, so young people have come to learn in sort of intensive courses. It's not like like a university course or anything like that. It's a very, very basic stuff. I've learned to use to make films, and they've made small documentary films now since 2004, except for 2 years where we had to close down because the security situation made it impossible to work. there's people really want to make films in Iraq, and it wasn't possible during the time of sanctions because, first of all, there was the government breathing down your neck, but also, you know, you couldn't get any cameras. You couldn't get cameras into the country if a camera needed fixing or a replacement of a spare part or something like that. You couldn't get that. There was no digital equipment in the country. There was no film or film labs or anything like that. So people were really hungry to make films. And they've started. I mean, there are several feature films that have made. They're quite rough, but they've been made. That's what my next project is going to be as well, sort of fiction film for the movies. But there's quite a few documentaries that have been made, which are important because they show something of what the lived everyday life of people that you don't see in the mainstream media. So yeah, I mean there is photography, yes, but film very much so. But there's no infrastructure, or there's no, you know, so it's quite difficult for people to make films. But and the security situation, of course, is very difficult. So to actually go out on the street and shoot is not easy. But people are doing it.
The new project that you just mentioned, can you give us a little tidbit on what the plans for that are?
Yeah, it's a fiction film. It's a sort of multiple story drama. It's like a mesh of stories, interlinking stories that run across each other. And in this very difficult time, 2006-07, which was a time of great violence and a time when there was a nightly curfew. So in the evening, the curfew would come down and you were locked in your house. You had to stay at home. In the morning at dawn, it would lift and people would go out, and you never knew what you were going to find on the streets, whether you were going to find open your gate and find a corpse on the street in front of you. That happened a lot, that sort of thing. And all night, while you're locked in your house, you're hearing gunfire and mortars as gangs fight each other, and all of this was going on. So this film really is about how people manage to try to live their ordinary lives in this very extraordinary situation, and how they keep a fragile sense of hope alive, which is something that you have to fight for every day. You know, it's like something that gets broken every night, and you have to renew it every morning. You know, it's something, and so it's these multiple stories are everybody has their own issues, and they're trying to sort of live their lives, and they have problems they have to solve, and so forth. And so it's really about that. And at the core of this is one story that's a bit more detailed than the others. It's about a writer who is a fiction writer who finds herself unable to write anything. She can't write any fiction because it just feels like a lie in the face of what's going on. And it's a real trauma for her because it's part of who she is. A writer is part of who she is, and she's unable to do it. So when her closest friend, who lives across the street, is forced out of the neighborhood by an extremist militia and has to leave the country, the writer feels like the piece of paper on which her life has been written has been torn up, because this woman who's forced to leave is the person who she had entrusted all her secrets to, who knew everything about her life, who was the witness to her whole life. And so it creates a sort of, it was like at that moment it becomes a matter of survival for you to sort of resist what's going on. And so she finds her way back to writing. Sort of various things happen, and she finds her way back to writing by the end of the film. But meanwhile, other people in the film are dealing with their issues, you know, and everybody makes slight shifts, maybe slight shifts, that to deal with what they're having to deal with, you know. So that's what it is, actually. That's what the film is.
We look forward to seeing that for sure. As
Don't hold your breath; it'll be a while.
As you know, the film that you are currently showing, Open Shutters Iraq, was truly moving. And thank you so much for joining us today at the Arabic Hour and for sharing your experiences with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
That was our interview with filmmaker Maysoon Pachachi on her documentary film Open Shutters Iraq. Please stay tuned for part 2 and the conclusion of our interview with Bo Beausoleil after this short program ID.
You are watching the Arabic Hour, a program of news, views, culture, cuisine, and the Arab American experience. To view today's program or any previous programs, log on to our website at www.arabichour.org.